All right. Hello and welcome to Virtual Coffee Lunch and Learn Edition. Virtual Coffee's mission is to be a welcoming tech community that allows room for growth and mentorship at all levels and to create meaningful opportunities for learning, leadership, and contribution for everyone. To find out our code of conduct, events, learn more, all of that stuff, you can check out our site at virtualcoffee.io. I'm really glad to be here today. I especially want to thank our presenter, Julia, for joining us. Julia Seidman is a technical marketing consultant and developer educator in the Seattle area. And today she's going to be talking about feedback. What's the goal? Give feedback that gets you closer. Okay, so this month, June 2022, is month of feedback here at Virtual Coffee. So we have an entire monthly challenge all around giving and receiving feedback. And so this talk is part of that challenge. And, you know, I think, I think that's pretty much it. So I'm going to get out of the way and let Julia take over. And thank you again, Julia, for joining us. And we'll go from there.
You bet. Oops. This Zoom window is blocking the button that I need.
What? Are you looking for the present button?
Present. There it is. Thank you. Okay, so when Becca or somebody posted about wanting people to give to maybe lead a lunch and learn about feedback, I initially responded and I was like, I don't know if I have enough to say to fill a whole lunch and learn. And I said I would share the time with somebody else, and she asked me what I thought I would want to talk about. And by the time I wrote down all the things I thought I would want to talk about, I realized it probably did have enough to fill a reasonable length lunch and learn. And one of my like big kind of, I don't know, passions, a place where I feel like I can add some value to the tech community is drawing on my my background as an educator. So before I pivoted into tech, my previous career was as a high school English teacher and ESL teacher, and yeah. And I think that there is a lot that we can take from the discipline of education and from psychology of learning and instructional methods and all that kind of stuff, that is really valuable for reflecting on how we work together. Since this is a really learning intensive industry and career that we're all in, I think it helps to kind of reflect on some of these principles and think about how they can kind of influence what we do in our professional lives. So feedback is an essential part of the learning process, right? Like, I think we can all reflect back on our experience in schools and think about the teachers who just sort of, spouted off information and didn't engage in dialogue versus the ones where there was a give and take, where you got feedback on your work, where you had a conversation in class. And those are the classes where you learn more. And that's not just like some fluffy idea. Like, it's actually founded in the psychology of learning. The more deeply you engage with an idea in sort of evaluative and analytical thinking, the more you will incorporate that idea, the more deeply you will incorporate that idea into your own thinking, the more you will remember it, etc. So feedback is really necessary in our careers. but I think it's really helpful to think about it in terms of it being part of the learning experience. So I'm sure we've all had feedback that goes wrong. And I would love if anybody wants to share an example of a story of when feedback went wrong in your life. Some of the ways I think feedback goes wrong is when there is way too much. Our brains cannot make sense of an enormous amount of different feedback all at once. It needs to be focused and purposeful. Too much feedback is overwhelming. Another way that feedback goes wrong is when there's too little. When someone gives you something back and is like, this needs work. Oh, okay. Terrific. What kind of work? Similarly, you can provide lots of feedback, but if it doesn't have context, if there isn't like a goal for that feedback, it's very difficult for people to know which feedback is the most important if they're actually meeting the mark. Another way that feedback goes wrong, and this one is one I am confident we've all experienced, is when tone gets in the way, when we perceive people as, if I'm the feedback recipient, if I perceive someone as being overly critical or inconsiderate. I had somebody just the other day, I asked a question. This was a client company. I actually want to see if I can find this thread. A client company, I asked a question in Slack, polite, detailed, and then somebody responded, hey, you guys are worrying about this too much. Stop worrying about it. Hard code the string user ID anywhere it's needed and carry on. That's all the detail you need. Erase the entire concept from your minds and hard code the string. I was like, okay. I literally responded, okay, thanks. Because what do you say when somebody gives feedback that way? It's not somebody I work with regularly enough that I was particularly hurt by it. But if that was somebody where I had an existing relationship with them, that feedback would have been pretty hurtful. So tone can definitely get in the way. And further, that feedback right there is a good example of feedback that shuts down dialogue. Like, I did not know what to say in response other than, okay, thanks. Like, I don't know. I'd like to be able to deliver good service to you, but as you are my client, but now I don't know how to talk to you. So there are a lot of ways that feedback goes wrong. Does anybody want to share any examples of your own? Of a time, I don't know. We'll just have a brief vent session. Becca?
I want to share somebody else's story. So this is maybe not useful, but I also was a teacher. And one of the most meaningful moments that I had teaching, I was teaching a freshman college English course. And one of the students who was older for the class level, he was in his 20s, came up to me after class, and I had given him feedback on his paper. And he said, this is the first time an English teacher didn't just tell me every single thing I did wrong on my paper. And for him, it was like a moment of like, he said, I'm not a terrible writer. I always thought that I was. And it goes along with that too much feedback stuff. And I think it can be hard, especially as a teacher, to say, like, you see all of the things, but you cannot possibly give feedback back on every single thing that needs improved in the paper, because then otherwise you discourage somebody who is already struggling.
Yeah, it's like, and I think that this happens sometimes in the workplace too, that like written documents, people will like hyper focus on like what I would call copy editing,
Yeah.
where, you know, and it's like, we don't need to comment on every single comma splice or tell people that they're using too many adverbs. Like, that's not, like, we can deal with that later. But yeah, if somebody is otherwise doing it, you know, engaging with ideas, has interesting things to say, it's good to start with a focus on those more material issues. Travis.
Yeah, I had an interesting kind of a situation when I was growing up. I used to play soccer, or to the rest of the world, football, rather seriously. And I was on one particular team where I had a coach and an assistant coach. I played a position where I was sort of in charge of coordinating defense. And my main coach would give me feedback like, you need to be engaged faster, and you need to, do this or do that, like kind of big picture stuff with very little detail. And then I would turn around and go to the assistant coach and I'd be like, okay, he told me these things. What does that mean? And then the assistant coach would give me like a lot more context on this is what I mean by, this is what the main coach meant by engaging faster, or organizing better, or collapsing, or the kind of giving more context and more relevant information. So yeah, I think in that situation, had I not had that assistant coach who was of the mindset to sort of decode the very sparse feedback that I got, I think it would have been a much more difficult situation for me.
Yeah,
on that team.
That's an awesome transition into my next slide, which was like the counterpoints to each of those. So effective feedback has a focused scope, which could be something like you need to engage faster. That seems like a pretty reasonable scope. But you need to offer at least one detail or example, something that the feedback recipient can like model their changed behavior on. So that would be like kind of what you're saying, Travis, where you were going to the assistant coach and being like, what does this mean? What do I do? So maybe the head coach was giving you like an appropriate scope. It's not too much necessarily, but lacking in that detail. So focused scope, let's not go through every single nitpicky grammatical stylistic thing in this document. Let's focus on, what really matters for the purpose of this document. But also within that scope, like, let's give at least one concrete detail or example that can serve as a model for where we're going. In terms of context, good feedback has a goal and it articulates the goal. This is like maybe the one thing they repeat the most often in ed school is that if you want people to learn something, if you want them to actually like incorporate an idea into their practice, into their cognitive patterns, you need to let them know the objective of the information that you're sharing. Where are we trying to go? By the end of this class, by the end of this feedback, by the time these revisions are done, for the next performance review cycle, this is where we want to be. And like, my feedback is serving to get us towards that specific goal. So you might have a goal, but if you don't actually articulate it, people are not going to have the context that they need to like know when to draw on that feedback, to know when to incorporate it. Another really important thing, and this is kind of the flip side to tone, kind of, I think maybe more important than like be nice or like treat people with kindness in terms of feedback, like those things are a given. Be kind. But in terms of the language that you use when you're giving feedback, maybe the most important thing to do is to reflect what in education world is known as growth mindset. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And then finally, you want feedback to invite reflection and conversation. Feedback should not be like a one and done. It should be an invitation to a process of growth, to a conversation where everybody is learning. So I want to talk about each of those qualities of effective feedback in a little bit more depth. So the first one is scope. So there's not like one scope that is always the right boundaries to put around your feedback. What you have to do is you have to think about what's the appropriate scope for the situation that we're in. What's the time frame for the feedback recipient to act on this feedback? Like, are you giving feedback on something that needs to be delivered to a client in 48 hours? In that case, like, let's focus on like discrete deliverables. Are you focused on like this person's long-term career growth? In that case, you can offer much more kind of nebulous, abstract feedback with the expectation that it's going to be a much more like ongoing conversation over time. So the time frame, like if you have a client project due in 48 hours, this is not the time to be telling somebody that you think it would be really good for them to, you know, change their attitude in how they approach, you know, I don't know, conflict with other teams. Save that for after. Another thing to think about is how many discrete skills are you targeting in your feedback? If it's more than a handful, even if the time frame is pretty long, if it's more than maybe even 2 or 3 skills, you need to break that feedback up into multiple different occasions. Giving feedback on more than 2 or 3 discrete things at a time, it's going to overwhelm people. You don't want to have more than 1, 2, 3 objectives for any given occasion of giving feedback. The other thing to think about in terms of scope is how this person who's receiving the feedback will be supported in incorporating the feedback that you're giving them. If you're giving them feedback that you have no ability or your workplace has no ability to support their growth in that area, that may not be appropriate feedback to give them until you've figured out how you're going to support their growth, or until you know that they have the resources available to them. Giving people feedback that isn't actionable can be really demotivating. So you want to make sure that the scope of your feedback matches the opportunities that people actually have to improve on those things. We talked a little bit about detail. Basically, like what Travis was saying, the person receiving feedback needs to know what you mean. If it's so vague that they're like, this is great, but like, what do I actually do? Then you have not given successful feedback. You need to give details or examples that people can model, can use as models. And you need to give them some kind of criteria for evaluating their own success. You don't want this to be a hand-holding relationship where somebody's coming back to you at every turn to say, like, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Because that's not a healthy relationship for anybody. When feedback is intended to support somebody else's growth, which means they need to be able to engage in self-reflection. So if you're going to give somebody feedback, you also need to help them understand what the standards are for their self-evaluation, which means you need to know what success looks like. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be the master of this domain, but you need to be able to point to an example somewhere of like, this is somebody who's doing it successfully, or this is what we want to emulate in, these specific ways. Let's see. Okay, context. This is like maybe the most important. Like I said, you've got to know what the goal of the feedback is, and you have to make that goal clear to the person receiving the feedback. So when we ask what's the goal, you need to know, like, what's the time frame for action? Does the goal need to be met by some specific date? Are there benchmarks? Are there going to be progress checks of some kind? That is, again, sometimes the feedback is like, we need to fix this before we deliver it to the client tomorrow. But sometimes the feedback is like, I think you could do a better job of, accepting alternative points of view when we meet with marketing, right? And that's like, okay, great. Like that is a goal that we could meet all of these other targets on, but what's the time frame? Is this like in our next meeting? Is this over the course of this year? Like, is this for this specific project? You need to know the time frame, and also like why it's a desirable change. Why, like, what do we gain if this person's behavior or work changes in this way? And whose standard is it? Like, where did this standard come from? What is motivating these expectations? And if people don't know these things, they're not going to buy in to the feedback. Okay, growth mindset. Does anybody have like kids in school who come home talking about growth mindset? I see Becca smiling and nodding. Anybody else? Does anybody want to try to explain what you think growth mindset is based on what your kids may or may not have said? Becca?
I'll share. I think in terms of the kids, and this is also something like we've talked about at home, it's the idea that they're not stuck in a situation. There's an opportunity for them to learn and to grow, and something that might seem hard today is not going to be hard forever. It's something that they can work on and they can learn. And so even if they're not good at, quote unquote, good at something, that there's still room to grow and to improve and even enjoy the thing that maybe they don't like today.
Yeah. My daughter, her teachers this past year were really big on the word yet. It's like, don't say, instead of saying, I can't do this, You say, I can't do this yet. And I think that it's a really, like, what a simple change. So when you're giving feedback to somebody, you want to kind of keep that in mind in how you frame the feedback that you're giving them. Not this isn't good, but this isn't where it needs to be yet. This can feel, the growth mindset stuff, I think, can feel a little like, I don't know, squishy for adults, but we are still human. Our brains still work according to kind of the same rules that kids' brains do in a lot of ways. And in terms of motivational psychology, psychology of learning, the growth mindset is just a hugely impactful thing, much more so than, we used to hear a lot about that whole idea of like the compliment sandwich. And the whole compliment sandwich thing is kind of debunked. It's not people don't need you to butter them up with like, oh, I don't know, whatever the fluffy compliment, a like criticism of their fundamental worth as a human, and then another fluffy compliment. That doesn't actually work. What works is feedback that helps a person understand their potential for success. So, so we love the word yet. We do not love the phrase you are, or it's not about who you are or what you are. It's not about fixed qualities. It's about quantifiable skills and progress towards benchmarks. So when you're giving feedback, you want to really try to avoid the like, you are this kind of feedback, and focus on you can do this more effectively. You worked hard, but you worked hard on the wrong thing. Like you do, giving people compliments on the things they do well is great, but you want those compliments to be about their effort, their progress, their attitude, and not on anything that's sort of fixed, like you are so smart. That is demotivating. It's like, oh, well, I guess if I'm already smart and I still didn't get this right, like, guess I'm never going to get it. A big part of how growth mindset works is through modeling. So if you want people you work with to buy into the idea that they can improve and that you are there to help them grow and improve and progress, you need to model these same growth mindset attitudes. Remind people how good it feels to improve. Remind people how good it feels to set a goal and work towards it, even if you don't achieve it by the first deadline. Show people, work in public, fail in public. Your feedback on other people's efforts will be much more valuable, and people will be much more likely to actually buy in and incorporate it if they see you doing the same work of self-reflection and goal setting and hard work. And kind of related to that, good feedback is an open dialogue. You want to model your growth mindset, and you want to model comfort with uncertainty. If you think maybe somebody could change the way they're doing something and get better results, make sure you let them know that you're not sure, that you think this is a good route, that your experience tells you it's a good route, and that your goal is their success, but that you can't guarantee their success. So, and then ask them questions. Why are they doing things the way they are? Why did they make X choice instead of Y choice? Maybe even ask them, what were you thinking when you reacted to Donna in marketing that way? Ask people questions, because you will find out much more meaningful information about how they approach their work. And related to that, if you see them doing something well, give them the opportunity to share. Feedback works better, like I said, when it's a two-way street, when you are modeling your openness to learn and grow. So you want to make sure that people feel encouraged to share their successes, to demonstrate, their growth on various objectives. That could be things that don't have anything to do with work. But providing people those opportunities to see that, like, their strengths and achievements matter and are interesting. Again, it goes a long way towards improving buy-in with feedback. So those are my bullet points. I'm gonna wrap up with a metaphor, which is, if you're giving someone directions, they need to know where they're going in case they get lost, in case there's a road closure, in case you forgot a step in the directions, in case they have to stop and go to the bathroom and they can't figure out how to get back on the highway. They've got to know what the end destination is so that they can ask for help in getting back on the route. So sometimes your directions are not going to work out. And I think it's important to reflect on, what do you do if you give feedback and it doesn't pan out the way you wanted? What if you give crappy directions? What if you include too many digressions about, what kind of gas to put in their car that really aren't relevant? How do you recover from that? How do you get them back on the road that you want them on? And I don't necessarily have answers here, but I think that, like, going back and reflecting on what makes effective feedback in the first place can hopefully, like, provide some direction in how to get back on track. And with that, I'm going to open it up for questions, comments, whatever. Yeah. Anybody? I see comments in the chat. Kirk.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for that. That was wonderful. I think this is definitely one of my, I need to personally bookmark this lunch and learns. Okay, so I'm thinking through everything you've said. I'm thinking of a couple specific scenarios of, I guess maybe the question I have right now is, say you have found somebody who seems, I don't know if I could say resistant to feedback, or you are trying as much as possible to frame it in these ways. It's like relevant, contextual, like positive, but they just can't sort of like escape the space of like, you're attacking me.
Right.
Do you think like, oh, if you keep at it, like this person can turn around? Like, is there a cutoff point where it's like, okay, maybe maybe you just have to say, okay, maybe I'm not the person who can give this person feedback, or just, I don't know. Like, is there a hard limit to this, or is it just like, just keep trying?
I have no idea. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts. Anybody? Travis, you have your hand up, but I'm guessing it's about something different.
Yeah,
Or
if I run into somebody who's being particularly obstinate and is like latched on to that negative mentality of like any criticism is an attack on my character. I honestly, I don't really know what, like, I don't have the best, course of action either, but I usually try to step away from that conversation earlier rather than later, because if you create a sense of ire towards yourself, then you don't get to have a second conversation where maybe they're in a different headspace. So pushing too far can kind of shut down your next opportunities.
I think
if
that's
you
a
need
really
to
good
circle back
point.
around.
Yeah.
But
I think that's a
that
really
being said, sometimes you're under a time constraint. So sometimes you got to be like, shut up, I'm not attacking you, which is not a very convincing statement. Maybe
But I think
work on the wording there.
that those are the situations where you have to be like, let's really align on what the goal is in this moment. And like, let's try to set aside, these other concerns for later. But like right now, can we both agree that the goal is to get X thing done, by this deadline, so that we don't both wind up in, in an unfortunate situation.
Yeah, I just want to say,
yeah,
like, finding those aligning goals, if you can find those aligning goals, I think that's the place to try to navigate to. And if you are trying to say, let's figure out how this works for both of us together, and that person is still really negative in responding, then it's probably going to be, you're going to have a hard time connecting in that situation in a way that's really productive. And so if you have the time to say, can we revisit this conversation at a different time, or talk through this in a different way that's more comfortable for you? Sometimes written feedback can be easier, then that might be the way to go. But otherwise, I don't know, it can be very challenging I feel like when people get super emotional and upset at me, then I get super emotional and upset. And I just like need to recognize that I need to give myself space to have a productive conversation too.
And I think, Becca, that was kind of like part of that example of the client with the not so great interpersonal communication skills. That one was a lot easier for me to like just let it roll off, because I didn't have the same emotional engagement with him that I might have with somebody that I work with, day in, day out. But I almost think that there's like sometimes, and this is, I feel like this is true with my kids. Like there are moments where like, you just need to be like, okay, thanks. Like I'm walking away, and like, we're not going to escalate this because it's just impossible to do productive. Like if people's kind of like, I don't know, they're like cortisol and like, lizard brain responses are like taking over, you can't change that for somebody else. And like your mirror neurons are going to start firing, and it's just going to get more heated and more ugly. But I mean, I don't know, like if somebody is persistently resisting feedback over a long period of time, like, I mean, we are adults, like, I don't know. being able to accept feedback in some measure is a necessary part of working with people.
So in the idea of sort of a spoonful of sugar, you mentioned that the idea of like a compliment sandwich doesn't work, to try to to soften the blow, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you were talking about how just kind of showing that both parties are aligned on the same outcome is a nice unifying factor that kind of takes some of the bite off of saying to someone that maybe they were doing something wrong, or that they could have been doing something better. But do you, Julia, in your experience, do you have any other techniques or any other kind of patterns that you found particularly effective at sort of like what I said, being the spoonful of sugar, like helping that to kind of take the sting out of some feedback that may be very necessary, but also may be very harsh?
That's a good question. So I think that the idea of like the spoonful of sugar is actually kind of almost like evidence of why it doesn't work. Like that is a trick. That is a trick. You are trying to trick someone.
Yes, of course.
And if people feel like they're being tricked, they're not going to like embrace what you're trying to tell them. So I mean, this is not a shortcut, but an authentic, trusting relationship is a pretty essential part of giving effective feedback. That doesn't mean you have to have known somebody forever and ever, but you need to demonstrate to them that you are somebody they can trust, and that you have their best interests in mind. And I think that in terms of strategies, questions are a really effective way to do that. Like if you can take a genuine interest in why somebody is going about things the way they are, then they may be more open to hearing your feedback on why that might not be the best strategy. But yeah, I like, it can't be a trick. Like, it's
fair enough.
The positivity is not a gimmick. Like, it's an essential part of what makes good feedback, is like your genuine investment in like this benefiting the other person.
So you're saying that if your relationship starts off by you floating out of the sky on an umbrella and then you start trying to give people granulated sugar along with chemicals, that's not a great basis for a relationship.
I don't, probably not. I don't know.
Thanks, Julia.
Yeah. Bogdan, you have your hand up.
Hello. Hi, Julia.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. I think it came this lunch in the right time. I'm definitely gonna bookmark it as well. But I have a more of a specific situation, which I don't know if anybody else got when they were in their beginning at the new job. Because I started my job fairly recently, like a few months ago, 2 or 3 months ago. So it's not that long, but we already had the first like feedback round and things like that. Where I ask my colleagues, my teammates for feedback. And most of it was fairly, I mean, in a fair manner, it was like, well, we didn't really work for too long together, so I don't know exactly what to say to this or things like that, which was fair. Like, we really didn't work for such a long time together. But now it's my turn to give feedback to my teammates. And I kind of like, I feel in the same position in a weird way. I mean, and I wanted to ask, like, how do you take like the tiny things that you've experienced in a limited amount of time and actually like transform them in like a proper, valuable, feedback that actually makes sense, right? Because I can also reply to all the feedback questions like, oh, we didn't really work together. I don't know what to say to this, but I really want to like offer valuable.
Oh, I got what you mean.
Yeah, okay.
That's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer. Anybody else have thoughts on that? Like, I've never been in one of those roles where you have to do those exercises. I don't know, for lack of a better word. So I'm not
No?
sure I have,
You know, like, okay. I thought
I'm
it's
not sure I
straight.
great insight. Does anybody else have thoughts? Like,
I have my own. I mean, I have to do it anyways, so
Yeah.
I'll do it just by taking the limited amount of information that I have and just extrapolating it a little bit, but
Yeah.
not in a dramatic way, but in the way of like, because I have experience, right? I have past experience, so I can like make these analogies and be like, well, based on what I know about you and based what I know about, you know, other projects, maybe we can do this or we can do that or things like that. But that's basically what I'm limited at now. Basically basing this person's experience on the experience that I had and kind of try to
Yeah.
sell it.
Yeah. Kirk, do you want to add?
Yeah.
What?
I've had that situation a couple times where it's like, new member of the team, great. Remember, Friday's a feedback round. I don't even know who you are, man. I think like, so that conversation about like the goals of the feedback is really important. Are these general things? Are these like specific to one project and like their actual goal on the project about something went good or badly? I think also before anything else, I think it's perfectly valid like that out of, I really do not have enough like time, familiarity, and context to give you an informed, like long form response. I think that's perfectly fair, right? And we were just talking about you can't give feedback if like on some level the person doesn't sort of like trust the words that are coming from you. And if you're still new to the team, that trust hasn't built up yet, I think that's okay to say. And that might also, I think people might also appreciate if you're just open and honest about that type of thing. So I don't think you should be afraid about that or feel like negatively about saying that. But I would say everything, if it's all coming from, well, in the context of when I worked with this person and this person, these are the patterns I noticed. Sometimes I will say like, there are things I'm getting used to on this team. And I will sort of describe like, these are my prior experiences. These are our current experiences. Not necessarily in the way of, this is what you're doing wrong, but like, this is my background. And like, I'm open to talking about what method we prefer or why the team does things the way we do. And sometimes that goes well and people go, oh, I didn't even, you're right. We should probably be doing more things that way. Or, you know, it's like more of a dialogue at that point rather than a, I'm right and you're wrong, or I think this is good and what you're doing is bad. And I found that can also work well with the new team.
Are you talking more about just like feedback or evaluations, like performance? Is it like a performance cycle or? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That is my
So the
reaction.
feedback isn't even necessarily going to that person. It's really more
For us,
evaluating.
it does as well.
Oh, it
Like,
does. Okay.
yeah, it's a little bit more personal, and then it gets to the leads and stuff like that. So
Gotcha.
it goes. It has to
Yeah.
be. It has to be nice and actionable, you know, because the people actually see it.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's not face to face, right? Like you just like you're submitting something, or you actually like meeting the person that you're giving the feedback to.
No. We're submitting.
Okay.
It's like, you know, where you like the kind of thing where it's like each of your coworkers gets peer evaluations as part of their perf. Like I would definitely err on the side of caution in that case. Like, don't, you don't, yeah. I don't know. That's a little harder to answer for me because it's not genuine feedback. or it's not a genuine feedback opportunity, right? Like,
Right.
it's,
I mean, it's not that often. So it's like twice a year. So it's not, you have
Yeah.
some things, you know, like, yeah.
I just mean like when it's specifically tied to a performance evaluation. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. If other people see it as well, then yeah, that's true. Like if your lead or manager sees it, then yeah, of course, it has to be a little bit performative, you know.
Yeah.
Like, "You're the best, get that promotion."
Yeah, like you don't, I don't know, but if you don't know somebody, like better to be just honest about that. And just, I haven't worked with this person very much, but I appreciate that they, I don't know, ask questions, have good hygiene.
You don't smell for Zoom.
All right. Well, I don't know. I like that they turn their camera on.
Yeah.
Anybody else have questions, comments, feedback for me?
I personally, I just enjoyed this talk a lot. I think if everybody else is all good, I think we'll wrap up. My feedback is this was a very excellent talk, and I like the I don't know, I like having these sorts of discussions where it's a little more, talking from personal experience and hearing from other people is really cool. So that's my feedback is
Yeah.
great job, Julia.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you everybody for coming and sharing your stories and stuff like that. Julia, do you have any other final words of wisdom or any last thoughts before we
No.
finish up?
None.
All right. Yeah, I like it. You
I'm
got
glad
it.
people like.
Got it all out there.
I woke up in the middle of the night last night, just like I was awake for like 2.5 hours in the middle of the night, and I very nearly bailed because I had not put together slides. I had thought about this, but not actually done anything. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be a disaster. So I'm glad it wasn't.
Yeah, no, far from a disaster. I think is great. And yeah, cool. Is there any place that people can, follow you or anything like that? Any links you want to share? I meant to ask you this earlier, but I'm just going to ask you live.
I mean, I'm on LinkedIn.
Julie's on LinkedIn.
I don't do social media, really.
All right.
So,
well,
all right.
That's cool. Obviously, you can find her in Virtual Coffee.
You can find, I mean, I have publications all over the place, but because that's what I do for work. I don't have my own blog or anything. So,
well, sure.
Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, like, honestly, it takes a whole huge chunk of your time off of your plate that you don't have to worry about. Not having to keep all that up to date.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah, thanks again. If anybody wants to continue the conversation or thinks of questions that they didn't think of during this session, we can follow up on Slack in Virtual Coffee Slack. We have I don't know which rooms would be most appropriate, but you can pick. There's the events room if you have direct feedback about this talk, and then other than that, I'd say pick the room that most lines up with your question, and I'm sure Julia and all of us would be happy to join in. Other than that, follow up the rest of our events on virtualcoffee.io/events. And thanks again, Julia. Thank you everybody for coming, and we will talk to you all later.
See y'all later. Thanks for coming.